the historical overview. Uh, that is 17th century period of the English Revolution, 1640 to 1660. In this particular unit, first unit, we will discuss some of the questions about English Revolution. Right. We will also discuss some of the questions pertaining to the Jacobean period, metaphysical poetry, cavalier poetry, and the comedy of humors, mask, and beast fables. So these are the topics are there on which we will get some questions and we will discuss on them. Right. The first thing is called as what revolution was in the 17th century. When I say that period of the 17th century period is nothing but the English Revolution. So what revolution was in the 17th century? The 17th century was a time of great political and social turmoil in England, marked by civil war and regicide. If you hear about Matthew White, who introduces the key events of this period, from the coronation of Charles I to the Glorious Revolution, and it continued more than 16 years later. So, अगर देखा जाए, the 17th century is considered as the turbulent century, turbulent 17th century. Turbulent का मतलब क्या होता है? Something which is called as a terrific.
Little bit thick.
Sorry? Turbulent का मतलब होता है means something which you can say that terrific, right? Full of devastated, decimated. Civil war यहाँ पे हुआ था, regicide, बहुत सारे means murder, that's called as a side, killing of, what do we say that? Killing of means political people, king. Then after the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution. The Restoration and Glorious Revolution, it indicates about means taking back to the same kind of a situation, restoration. And the Glorious Revolution is something, a kind of a revolution in which means certain secrecy, certain plan was conducted to attack, right, which have a name called as a Glorious Revolution. So 17th century was a time of great political and social turmoil in England. So it marked by the civil war. So 17th century is marked by what? The civil war. Civil war means it's a people against the rule or ruler, and the regicide. So based on the Matthew White, who introduces the main events of this 17th century period, from the coronation of Charles I to the Glorious Revolution, and continued more than 60 years later. So किस हिसाब से 60 साल तक ये जो means revolution continue करता गया उसी के ऊपर. The 17th century was a period of a huge political and social upheaval, imbalance, from an age characterized by the crown's tight control of the state. Right. Crown's tight control of the state, matlab, here you are talking about the king, right? So whoever was the king, he was trying to control the empire and the kingdom, empire or the kingdom and the people under him. The 17th century marked the witness. So ये एक evident है that the war continued for many years. Not only war, the terror, डर जो हम कहते हैं, terror and bloodshed and unnecessary kill that enveloped the kingdom. That enveloped the kingdom means where the kings were involved, as well as the execution. So if you see that this is the century, not only political, social, crowns control, right? Or you talk about war, terror, and bloodshed, right? It is also evident that how Charles I was executed and the introduction of a republic, right? So introduction of a republic means people's rule. Yet all this was again to be overthrown with the restoration of Charles II. So उस हिसाब से अगर देखा जाए, so Charles I के execution के बाद, right? So जो dream था, जो thought था कि republic आ गया और like people will rule, right? And but at the same time, the restoration pointed that how Charles II came back. A short-lived return to autocratic royal influence finally swept away with the installation of William and Mary as ruling monarchs. Right. So Charles II, who was, who was taking the part for a short period of time, right, and trying to follow the rule, autocratic royal influence, right, and after him we draw or we found means William and Mary as ruling monarch. So if we go from the beginning of it, agar pehle se dekhe, then what do we find out? Charles I and the ideas of authoritarianism or absolutism. So the English Civil Wars, where its actually origin, the origins of the English Civil Wars are firmly rooted in the actions of one man. देखा जाए इंग्लिश का जो सिविल वॉर, उसका ओरिजिन एक ही आदमी से शुरू हुआ, किंग चार्ल्स I. He is the root. As a child, Charles was never, destined or never thought to succeed to the throne. कभी ये नहीं लगा था कि Charles I would control the kingdom or he became the king, right? So why? Now the weak and sickly second son of James I. So अगर देखा जाए, James I. So the weak and sickly second son of James I, Charles had lived in the shadow of his elder brother Henry. Right. Charles had lived in the shadow of his elder brother Henry means now James I, who have two of the sons. One is called as a Henry and the other one is called as a Charles. So as an elder brother Henry, right? So Charles is the second one. So Charles cannot become the king of it. So Henry is supposed to be. So who was Henry, who was educated in the ways of kinship by his father. All this changed when in 1612, Henry contracted smallpox and died. Now you find out that James I, who have two sons, one is called as Henry and the other one is Charles. And as the Charles was present, so Henry, as the Henry was present, so Charles could not be the king. So therefore, what happened? Now, Henry was educated for the kingship of his father, and suddenly in 1612 he was attracted or contracted with the smallpox disease, and he died. When he died, suddenly placing Charles as a heir to the throne, and finally to be crowned in his own right in 1625. Right. So finally, what happened? Now Charles was crowned in his own right in 1625. Now, do you understand how Charles came into the power? Charles came into the power because Henry was affected with the smallpox and died. And that's why James I's second son, Charles, was crowned in his own right in 1625. So, if you see that, the old King James I, who had been schooled in notions of compromise. So, if you see that Charles and James I, the difference is what? Now, James I is a old school student, had been schooled in notions of compromise. So he has a different character, whereas Charles had a different character. James had a notion of or ideas of compromising, forced to negotiate with his nobles, on matters of religion and affairs of state. Forced to negotiate. इसका मतलब क्या होता है? Means so he always bargain with his nobles of matters of religion and affairs of state. So कोई भी state का matter हो या मतलब kingdom का matter हो या तो कोई एक issue, right? He is forced to negotiate. वो negotiate कर लेते थे. Charles, by contrast, adopted a starkly different approach. लेकिन जब Charles came into power, so he was different. He was completely opposite. His father was believing in compromising and negotiating, James I. So whereas Charles was completely opposite, adopted a starkly different monarch, starkly different approach. Starkly different approach means straightforward. Believing that his authority alone was his authority. It means he was a king and his authority was supreme. Supreme means top and ordained by God. And because of the God's order, he became the king and defined by the principle. So he follows the one of the rule. The rule is called as a divine right of kings. Divine right of kings means what? Now, whatever the order of the king is the order of God. So that is why it is for me to decide how our nation is to be governed. He wrote, I alone must answer to God for our exercise of the authority he has invested in me. So he was a different one. He believed that he was the only one who had to give, answer to God, right? And that's why his exercise of authority is his duty, right? And whatever the authorship is given to him, it was given by God himself, right? So, and that's why he believed that his order is divine's order. His right is divine's right, right? So that's why he was not like his father, right? He did not believe in compromise. He did not believe in negotiation, right? So he believed in absolutism. So Charles wants absolutism, right, or called as a oneness authorship, displayed itself at a time of emerging self-confidence among the English educated, English alike. Charles wants absolutism manifested means displayed itself at a time of coming out self-confidence among the English alike. Though Though Parliament met only sporadically during this period. Sporadically means what? Not always. All right. For a uh, means you can say that hardly, right? Couple of times. Though Parliament met only sporadically during this period and acted mainly in an advisory role to the sovereign. So by the time Charles was crowned, he was already highly dependent on the gentry's ability to raise adequate tax revenues. He was habituated, right, or dependent. So that the putting tax on people, common people, peasants, right? So deriving or drawing the agricultural rents far exceed any other source of income. So it was this body of landowning gentlemen that constituted the bulk of members of parliament. Men who in theory could buy withholding as a sources of income, right? It goes to the account of the king. So you would find out people who, earn extra sources or extra income, people who also followed means cultivation, agricultural cultivation, right? So from them, the king used to collect excessive uh, rent, excessive taxes, right? So in the year of 1624, right, uh, one of the House of Commons sitting in the former St. Stephen's Chapel in the in the Palace of Westminster. Uh, if you see that the conflict was held between Crown and the Parliament, arose for a number of reasons. So because of the Charles means absolutism nature, right, there were many conflicts held between crown, the king, and also parliament for a number of reasons. In matters of religion, Charles appeared to disregard in matters of religion. So in the case of when you find out that the king and the parliament, they went through many of the conflict, and one of the conflicts you would find out that the religion, which is a common in matters of religion, Charles appeared to disrespect the Protestant settlement secured by Henry VIII, right, favoring instead the Catholic Mass, and in 1625 marrying a Catholic member of the French nobility, whose name is called as Henrietta Maria. So what do you find out here? Here you would find out Charles disregard the Protestant, which was supported by Henry VIII, supporting instead the Catholic Mass in 1625, right? So The marrying a Catholic member of the French nobility, Henrietta Maria, Charles also continued to act unilaterally in matters of foreign policy. What Charles did? Now, he was unilaterally. Unilaterally means what? Solely. Matlab akele hi. Continued to act unilaterally in matters of foreign policy and in the face of criticism labeled by his chief advisor. Dissolved parliament in 1629. So parliament was also dissolved in the year of 1629. Parliament would not meet again for another 11 years. So it all held during the time of Charles, right? So the order says that Charles joined as a ruler. So he followed the lavish lifestyle. So he put excessive taxes to the common people. Second, his nature is also creating conflict among the religion people. He appeared to be disregarded to the Protestant settlements. And you would find out because of this, what happened means the parliament dissolved in 1629. Parliament would not meet again for another 11 years. Without parliament to sanction his financial needs. So Charles realized that if he was not allowing, or if the parliament is not functioning, then the financial needs will not be sanctioned. So Charles found himself in increasingly difficult circumstances. So where does he collect the revenue? Rebellion in Scotland. Rebellion means that's called as a war. War started in Scotland, influenced by Charles' insensitive imposition of a new prayer book. So why the war held in the Scotland? Because influenced by Charles' insensitive imposition of a new prayer book. So imposition means Charles did nothing but put a new book, right, for the prayer. Launched a new book that required that additional revenues be raised in order to finance a military response. So the first thing is called as a rebellion in Scotland. Second is called as a you need money, or you need to finance a military response. You don't have money also. So that's why what you did, now you required additional revenues be raised. And if you need the additional revenues, then your parliament must be functioning. Reluctantly, the king convened a new parliament in 1640. So you understood that 1629, the parliament dissolved. After 11 years, it means 1640, the king convened a new parliament in 1640. The new parliament that met that year was at once openly hostile to the crown. The new parliament that met that year, so उसी साल जो parliament हुआ, so that was at once openly hostile. Hostile means cruelty to the crown. To the crown means to the ruler. Member of parliaments complained badly about the imposition of taxes. So the ruler or the king, right, who put the taxes and the blatant disregard of religious toleration in the north. So three things happen. The first thing is called as a imposition of taxes, unnecessarily taxes are implemented. Second is called as a blatant disregard of religious toleration in the north. So means excessively disreputed or disregard to the religious section in the north side, which cannot be tolerated. The Scotlands had rejected Charles' prayer book and drafted a national covenant in defiance of the king. So what Scotland did? The Scotland went against the King Charles' prayer book, stopping his religious reforms. So Scotland went against the king and issued one of the draft. The draft is called as a national covenant in defiance and stopping his religious changes in favor of a simpler form of Protestant worship, right? Sensing weaknesses in Charles' position. So what happened? Key concessions were demanded from the king, right? And personal attacks were launched against his key minister, right? Now, do you find out that now when the Charles watch, when Charles was suffering in lots of situation, the first thing is called as a no money is there for financing military response. Second is called as a his book was or his prayer was his reformation of prayer was also rejected in Scotland, right? So member of parliaments are also raises lots of questions of his improper imposition of taxes, right? So Parliament dissolved for 11 years. His religious disregard. So all these are called as going against the king. And understanding the weakness in Charles' position. So obviously, the allied section and the other section, so they understand the Charles is not in a position. So understanding weakness in Charles' position, the main concessions were demanded from the king. Key concessions, right? And personal attacks were launched also. So means his key ministers who have been accused. Among them, you can find out the Thomas Wentworth, the Prince of Stafford. They all was to suffer the death penalty for what Parliament labeled acts of treason against the Scottish nation, right? So these people like Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Stafford, so they were given death penalty. Why? Because Parliament labeled means accused the acts of treason going against the what do we say that? Going against the country, against the Scottish nation. A bust attempted to arrest 5 MPs for treason, said the king, directly in conflict with his people. The scene was set. The scene was set for civil war. Even means some of the MPs were also found against against the people, right? And how he means they were influenced by the king. So this act lead to the civil war, right? So then it started with the nation at war. So when Charles I found, fearing of his own safety, in 1642, Charles fled London. Charles left to where? London. So first, moving towards north to where he believed his main support lay. So he thought that he would get the support from London, right? That's why he left to London, not right. At Hull, the king was refused. The king was refused by the people, or called as by the authoritarianship, right? Not to enter the city by the Lord Mayor. So Lord Mayor, who refused to enter, who refused the King Charles to enter. And later that year, what happened in Nottingham? Charles raised his royal standard, right? The first symbol of open warfare with Parliament. So what Charles did, now he went against the Parliament, declared the warfare with Parliament. On 23rd of October 1642, the first true battle of the civil wars took place. At Edge Hill in Warwickshire, resulting in stalemate. So you would say that a kind of a conflict between parliamentarian and the royalist forces. For 4 years afterwards, skirmishing and warfare erupted across the nation. So it continued throughout the nation as roundheads. It labeled for the parliamentarians short cropped hair, right? And the cavaliers, a derogatory term, described the courtly dress of royals. So if you look into that, the cavaliers, what is that? The cavaliers are those of the people who are means, wearing the dress of royalist, right? So, and this cavalier term is called as a degrading or dejecting term to describe the royalist. Paced themselves against each other. Families were torn apart as uncles, sons, brothers, and fathers took up arms against one another. In total, perhaps 1 lakh soldiers and civilians died during the wars, and 10,000 houses were destroyed. So this gives the civil war that started on 23 October 1642. The first two battle of the civil wars took place. Where? At Edge Hill in Warwickshire. Right. So between parliamentarian and royalist forces. Then finally we come to the death of our king following the defeat at the Battle of Naseby. Right. Following defeat at the Battle of Naseby in 1645, Charles placed himself in the hands of Scottish forces at Newark. So he was hoping to seek concession from Parliament. So he felt that what Parliament would forgive him. 3 years of effective house arrest followed. 3 years of effective house arrest followed. So he was kept in the house arrest, during which time further battles were fought across the country. So when he was there, so many of the other battles that were fought across the country. In 1648, while in custody at Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight, Charles attempted one final effort to save his crown or become king. Those senior politicians voted to consider his proposals for negotiation, right? So senior politicians, they helped Charles I. But military forces like ordered by Oliver Cromwell, military forces commanded by Oliver Cromwell overruled parliament, went against the parliament, branding the king. So branding the Charles was a king, a tyrant, and a traitor. King, a tyrant. Tyrant means cruel, and a traitor also. In April 1648, Charles I's son James, the future James II, so who escaped to England for Holland, disguised in girls' clothing, the royalist lady Anne Halkett, whose memoirs are shown, right, assisted James by ordering him a scarlet petticoat and waistcoat, right. In January 1649, you would find out that Charles was indicted by Parliament on a charge of high treason, conspiracy, accused of waging an unjust war. So he was blamed that what? Like he was influencing for unnecessary war, whereby the country has been miserably wasted, right? Whereas the country is suffering for it. The public treasure exhausted, so the money of the public account is wasted a lot. Trade decayed, thousands of people murdered on 20th January 1649. Charles was again came on trial at Westminster Hall, where he refused to accept the authority of the court. Once again, he was claimed that only the sovereign could exert ultimate authority. So he claimed that what? Now he was the God and he would take the ultimate authority. Parliament would not countenance such a position. After listening to 30 witnesses for the prosecution, on 26th January, Charles I was condemned to death. His execution, his death warrant signed by 59 commissioners. On the morning of Tuesday, 30 January 1649, Charles I was laid through St. James Park to the banqueting house in Whitehall, right, where a scaffold means black cloth, that had been prepared for his execution. On mounting the platform at 2 o'clock that afternoon, he prayed fervently, declaring defiantly, he was also shouted and declared that I shall go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown, where no disturbances can be. With one swift blow, Charles' head was removed by the executioner's axe. An unprecedented act of regicide, hereafter unknown in British history. Unprecedented act. It was considering as an unprecedented act of regicide, hereafter unknown in British history. That was all about Charles I and how he acted for the Civil War, his involvement, his influence, his absolutism, everything. Okay. Next class will go after that what happened. We will discuss that. So we'll meet in the next class. Till then, bye-bye. Thank you all.